Luo Yan's world was made of concrete, caffeine, and the constant, low-grade hum of existential dread. Tonight, it was also made of profound regret for choosing a career in urban planning. His desk was a cartographical disaster zone, buried under blueprints for a new suburban roundabout, a project so soul-crushingly mundane he was convinced it was slowly erasing his fingerprints. He slumped in his chair, the glow of his monitor the only light in the empty office. To procrastinate, he'd pulled up the web novel that had been clogging his digital periphery for weeks, The Beast King's Harem. It's popular, his friend had insisted. A guilty pleasure. By chapter 3, Luo Yan's guilt had been replaced by a deep, philosophical annoyance. The story followed a powerful beast king named Kalen as he collected love interests with the discerning taste of a magpie collecting shiny trash. But the character that truly galled him was the villain, a petty, scheming, ridiculously named character named Luo Yan. "This guy is a catastrophe," he muttered to the empty office, taking a savage slurp of cold coffee. "His entire personality must make the protagonist look good. He's less a character and more a plot device with a death wish." He scrolled to a particularly egregious scene where the villainous Luo Yan attempted to poison the female lead's pet wolf pup, only to be caught and publicly humiliated by the Beast King. And the logic? Why poison the puppy? What does that achieve? The infrastructure of this plot is collapsing. The author didn't even bother to lay the proper pipes for this character's motivation. He was ranting now, his voice echoing in the sterile silence. "If I had a system, even a broken one, I could build a better story than this. This isn't a novel, it's an urban planning nightmare." The sky outside, which had been threatening a storm all evening, finally made good on its promise. A crack of thunder boomed, unnaturally loud. The lights in the office flickered, a frantic, strobing dance. His computer screen flared from the dull blue of the novel's interface to a blinding, electric white. System sync detected. User vocalization, infrastructure, keyword confirmed. The text scrawled across the screen, not in any font he recognized, but in jagged, glyph-like characters that somehow translated directly into his brain. "What the?" Luo Yan jerked back, his chair rolling a few inches. A power surge. It had to be. He reached for the power button. Protocol initiated. Assessing user compatibility. Compatibility, 97.3%. Optimal. "No, no, no," he whispered, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This felt wrong. This felt real. Deploying to target world, the barren wastes. Mission parameters, world salvation via infrastructural development. Cancel. Abort. "I take it back," he yelled, slamming his hand on the keyboard. The monitor's light wasn't just on the screen anymore, it was bleeding out, filling the room, consuming his desk, his chair, him. The hum of the office computers morphed into a high-pitched whine that felt like it was drilling directly into his teeth. He felt a sensation not of falling, but of being unspooled. His body was a string of data being pulled through a cosmic needle. There was a final, violent lurch, and the world snapped back into existence with the subtlety of a car crash. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It was the complete and utter absence of the city. No exhaust fumes, no distant smell of food, no ozone from the storm. Instead, it was dust, dry rock, and a strange, metallic tang in the air. The second thing was the heat. It was an oppressive, dry weight that pressed down on him, leaching the moisture from his skin and lungs with every breath. He was on his knees, his hands scraping against coarse, red sand and sharp gravel. His expensive ergonomic office chair was gone. His computer was gone. The entire skyscraper was gone. He was in a desert. But not the kind with beautiful, rolling dunes. This was a wasteland. A cracked, ruddy plain stretched to a horizon of jagged, purplish mountains under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Two sickly-looking suns, one large and pale orange, one small and viciously white, hung overhead. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the heat-induced haze. This is a dream. A stress-induced hallucination. I fell asleep at my desk. A sterile, robotic voice spoke directly into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. "User Luo Yan. Welcome to the Orc world. The infrastructure system is now fully integrated." Luo Yan squeezed his eyes shut. "Go away. Primary mission, save the world." He let out a hysterical little laugh. "Save the world? From what? A lack of zoning laws? Current infrastructure level, 0, primitive. World integrity, 15% and declining. User must complete construction and development tasks to accumulate points. Upon reaching 10,000 points, a return portal to your world of origin will be activated. A screen materialized in his vision, transparent yet solid, listing his stats. User, Luo Yan location, the Barren Wastes, Outer Fringe mission, establish base infrastructure points, 0/10,000. The reality of it finally crashed down on him. This wasn't a dream. The system, the two suns, the desolate landscape, it was all terrifyingly real. He'd been ripped from his life and dumped into a dying world for a cause he didn't understand, all because he'd complained about a badly written book. A wave of nausea and despair washed over him. He was wearing his thin office shirt and slacks. He had no water, no food, no shelter. He was going to die here, in the opening chapter of his own personal hell. Initial tutorial task available, construct a basic water filtration unit. Reward, 10 points. Required materials, sand, gravel, charcoal, pour a stone vessel. With what? Luo Yan croaked, his throat already parched. My winning personality? But the system, as if anticipating his question, highlighted a cluster of rocks nearby. One of them, a pitted, gray stone, glowed with a soft blue outline. A tooltip appeared, suitable porous stone vessel. Driven by an instinct deeper than pride, the instinct to survive, Luo Yan crawled towards it. The rock was heavy and awkward. He looked around. Sand and gravel were in abundance. Charcoal, his eyes fell on a few scorched, blackened branches from a long-dead shrub. A memory from a long-ago survival documentary flickered in his mind. A basic filter. Layers of sand, gravel, and crushed charcoal. It wouldn't be perfect, but it might make the brackish-looking water in a nearby small, muddy depression drinkable. His hands shook as he worked, smashing the charcoal against a larger rock, layering it clumsily into the hollowed stone. He was an urban planner, for heaven's sake. His job was to argue about public transit routes and green space allocation, not to practice desert survival. Finally, it was done. A crude, lopsided filter. He carried it, staggering, to the muddy pool. He poured the murky water through his makeshift device, watching it trickle out the bottom, slightly less brown. It was the most pathetic-looking piece of engineering he had ever seen. He cupped his hands and took a tentative sip. It tasted of earth and smoke, but the overwhelming putridity was gone. Tutorial task complete, basic water filtration unit. Reward, 10 points. Total points, 10/10,000. A pathetic number. A mountain to climb, 1 grain of sand at a time. But in that moment, it was a number. It was proof he could affect this world. Proof that there was, however faintly, a path home. As the lukewarm, filtered water soothed his raw throat, a new sensation prickled at the edge of his awareness. It was the feeling of being watched. Not by the system, but by something organic. Something intelligent. Slowly, dread pooling in his gut, Luo Yan turned his head. On a rocky outcrop about 50 yards away, silhouetted against the smaller, harsher sun, stood a figure. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with the powerful, tapered legs of a predator and the broad, muscular torso of a titan. A tail swished slowly behind it. But it was the head that sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through him. It was a wolf, but unnaturally intelligent eyes gleamed from a face that was a terrifying fusion of beast and man. It had sharp, prominent canines and a short muzzle, covered in a silvery fur that caught the light. And those amber eyes were locked directly on him. It was him. The Beast King. Kalen. The character from the bad novel. The protagonist. The one the original Luo Yan was destined to enrage and be destroyed by. Their eyes met across the desolate expanse. Luo Yan's breath hitched. He was frozen, a mouse under the gaze of a hawk. The Beast King didn't move. Didn't snarl. He simply observed, his expression an unreadable mask of bestial intensity. He took in the scene, the strange, soft-skinned creature, the crude stone filter, the act of drinking. After a heart-stopping moment that felt like an eternity, the Beast King's ears twitched, almost imperceptibly. Then, with a fluid, silent grace that was terrifying in its own right, he turned and melted away into the jagged landscape, disappearing as if he were a ghost. Luo Yan was left alone, the two suns beating down on him, the taste of filthy water in his mouth, and the chilling knowledge that his plan to stay far, far away from the plot had just spectacularly failed in the first 10 minutes. He had 10 points. And 9,990 to go. The road home was going to be very, very long. The silence the Beast King left in his wake was louder than any thunder. Luo Yan remained on his knees, the coarse grit of the sand biting into his palms, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The encounter hadn't been violent, but it felt more like a territorial marking than a simple glance. He hadn't just been seen, he had been assessed. Okay, he whispered to himself, the words scraping out of his dry throat. Okay. Don't panic. Panic is a luxury you can't afford. He forced himself to breathe, inhaling the dusty, heat-shimmered air. The two suns were relentless. The larger, orange one provided a diffuse, baking heat, while the smaller, white one felt like a laser pinpoint on his skin. He was already beginning to sweat, a dangerous expenditure of precious water. The system, ever helpful and utterly tone-deaf, chose that moment to chime. New priority task, construct basic shelter. Reward, 25 points. Failure condition, user demise from exposure or predation. Predation? Luo Yan's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the jagged horizon. The word took on a new, horrifying dimension beyond the abstract. He thought of Kalen's amber eyes, the corded muscle, the silent, predatory grace. Was he the predation? Or were there other things out here, things that didn't bother with silent observation? A fresh wave of adrenaline shot through him, burning away the last of his stunned inertia. He had to move. He had to build. His modern mind, trained to think in terms of permits and public consultations, was useless here. He needed something primal. His eyes fell upon the rocky outcrop where Kalen had stood. At its base was a shallow recess, little more than a shadow against the stone. It wasn't a cave, but it was a start. A wall to his back. Gathering materials was a lesson in agony. Every piece of wood, every stone, was a battle. His soft, office worker hands were soon a mess of blisters and scratches. He found a few long, desiccated branches from a hardy, thorny bush that seemed to be the only plant stubborn enough to survive here. They were brittle and snapped easily, but a few were sturdy enough. His plan was simple, born from childhood memories of building pillow forts, a lean-to. He propped the longest branch against the rock face, creating a slanted roof. Then, he started layering smaller branches, twigs, and armfuls of the dry, razor-edged grass that grew in stubborn clumps. He worked with a frantic, desperate energy, his movements fueled by the visceral memory of those amber eyes. The system, for its part, was a brutal foreman. It didn't offer advice, only critique. As he layered the grass, a notification flickered. Structural integrity, poor. Wind resistance negligible. Thermal insulation, non-existent. Thanks, Luo Yan grunted, slapping another bundle of grass onto the frame. Maybe instead of criticizing, you could magically conjure some duct tape? The system was silent. Apparently, sarcasm wasn't in its programming. After what felt like hours, his shelter was complete. It was, without a doubt, the most pathetic structure ever conceived by human or any other hands. It looked like a large, sad bird's nest that had been in a train wreck. He could probably fit inside it if he curled into a fetal position, which, given his current mental state, seemed appropriate. But as he stood back, sweating and panting, another notification appeared. Task complete, basic shelter. Reward, 25 points. Total points, 35/10,000. A wave of exhaustion so profound it felt like a physical blow washed over him. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving only the raw, aching reality of his situation. He crawled into the shallow recess of the rock, pulling his pathetic lean-to close around him. It blocked the direct glare of the smaller sun and offered a sliver of shade. It was something. As the larger, orange sun began to dip towards the purple mountains, painting the sky in shades of burnt umber and violet, the temperature began to plummet. The baking heat vanished, replaced by a chill that seeped up from the sand and down from the now visible stars. Luo Yan shivered violently in his thin office clothes, huddling deeper into his meager shelter. The contrast was shocking. This world didn't just want to cook him, it wanted to freeze him, too. He spent the night in a state of fitful, terrified half-sleep. Every rustle of the wind through the grass, every scuttling sound in the darkness, jolted him awake, his heart in his throat. He imagined wolves, giant scorpions, and worst of all, the silent, looming presence of the Beast King returning to finish his inspection. When the first hints of light tinged the horizon, he was already awake, stiff, cold, and desperately thirsty. He drank from his filter, the water now tasting faintly of dust and his own fear. The points counter in the corner of his vision 35 seemed to mock him. It was nothing. A rounding error on the path home. He needed a new plan. A better one. Scavenging for twigs wouldn't cut it. He remembered the system's initial proclamation, world salvation via infrastructural development. Maybe he needed to think bigger. Not as a survivor, but as a planner. He stood, his joints protesting, and looked out at the wasteland with new eyes. Not just as a desolate hellscape, but as a site. A problematic one, sure. The zoning was a nightmare, the environmental conditions were non-compliant, and the local wildlife was problematic. But it was a site nonetheless. System, he said, his voice hoarse. Show me a map of the immediate area. Topography. Water sources. A transparent overlay flickered in his vision. It was crude, a wireframe model of the land around him. He could see the rocky outcrop, the muddy pool he'd been using, and, to his interest, a thin, blue line snaking through the landscape about a mile away. A river? Or just a larger stream? Designate, primary water source. The system stated. Water purity, low. Contaminants, biological, mineral. A project began to form in his mind, a spark of professional interest igniting through the gloom. A proper water collection and filtration system. Gravity-fed, if the topography allowed. It would require tools, materials, and a level of effort he couldn't yet fathom, but it was a plan. A real one. As he was mentally sketching out the initial designs, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Down in the shallow valley below his perch, a small, rabbit-like creature with long, nervous ears was nibbling on one of the thorny bushes. Food. His stomach clenched painfully. He hadn't eaten in over a day. He had no weapons. No skills. He was a vegetarian by choice, not that the rabbit cared. But then he looked at the snares he had built the previous day, crude loops of woven grass placed along what he guessed were animal trails. They were a long shot, a Hail Mary based on a half-remembered scouting manual. He decided to check them, his hope a fragile thing. The first two were untouched. The third was broken. His heart sank. But as he approached the fourth, nestled between two rocks, he saw it. The snare had held. The rabbit-like creature was there, still and small. A wave of conflicting emotions hit him. Elation at the success. Revulsion at the means. This wasn't a neatly packaged steak from a supermarket. This was a life, small and warm, now dead because of his actions. The reality of this world was brutal and direct. There were no intermediaries here. As he bent down to retrieve his grim prize, the feeling returned. The prickle on the back of his neck. The unsettling certainty of a focused gaze. He didn't want to look. He didn't need to. He knew. Slowly, he straightened up and turned. Kalen was there. Closer this time. Maybe 30 yards away, standing as still as the rocks themselves. The early morning light cast his silver fur in a soft glow, highlighting the sheer power coiled in his frame. His amber eyes weren't on Luo Yan this time. They were fixed on the rabbit in his hand. Luo Yan's blood ran cold. Was this a challenge? Was the Beast King asserting dominance over the hunt? The novel's plot screamed in his mind, provoke the protagonist and suffer. He acted on pure, desperate instinct. It was a gesture he'd seen in a dozen nature documentaries, a gesture of non-threatening submission. Slowly, carefully, he bent his knees, placed the dead rabbit on the ground in front of him, and took 2 steps back, his hands open and raised at his sides. He bowed his head, not in reverence, but in a desperate, universal signal. I am not a threat. The prize is yours. He stood there, heart pounding, waiting for the growl, the charge, the end. But it didn't come. After a long, breathless moment, he dared to look up. Kalen hadn't moved. His head was tilted slightly, those intelligent eyes now studying Luo Yan's face with an expression that was no longer just assessment. It was curiosity. The intensity was still there, a palpable force, but the edge of predatory threat had receded, replaced by something more complex, more confusing. Then, with the same silent fluidity as before, Kalen turned. But instead of melting into the landscape, he took a few steps, then paused. He looked back over his massive, fur-covered shoulder, his gaze locking with Luo Yan's once more. It wasn't an invitation. It was a statement. I am still here. I am still watching. Then he was gone. Luo Yan stood trembling for a full minute before he could move. He stumbled forward and snatched up the rabbit, his mind reeling. The interaction made no sense. Why hadn't Kalen taken the food? Why did he keep appearing only to watch? He looked at the points counter. 35. He looked at the dead rabbit in his hand. He looked at the vast, unforgiving expanse of the barren wastes. The Beast King was an enigma, a dangerous variable he couldn't solve. But the rabbit was real. The hunger was real. The points were real. For now, that was all that mattered. He had to focus on building his foundation, one reluctant, terrifying step at a time. The rabbit was a lesson in humility and horror. Back in the relative safety of his lean-to, Luo Yan stared at the small, limp body. His stomach growled, a traitorous sound that warred with a knot of nausea in his throat. He was a city boy. His experience with meat involved polystyrene trays and cling film. This was different. This was visceral. He had no fire. The system, when queried, offered a task for basic fire starting with a reward of 15 points, but required a suitable ignition tool he didn't possess. He was out of options. With a shudder of revulsion, he remembered snippets of survival shows. Needs must. It was messy. It was brutal. It was the single most difficult thing he had ever forced himself to do. By the end, his hands were slick with blood, and a part of his civilized soul felt like it had been scoured away. He ate the raw meat in small, choking bites, focusing on the protein, the energy, the sheer biological necessity of it. It tasted of iron and survival. The points for the basic sustenance task popped up. Plus 10 points. Total, 45/10,000. The number was an insult. He had just debased himself for a pittance. Despair threatened to swallow him whole. He curled up in his meager shelter, pulling his knees to his chest, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he allowed a few hot, furious tears to track through the grime on his cheeks. He cried for his lost life, for his soft bed, for the stupid, mundane roundabout he would now give anything to be designing. He cried out of sheer, undiluted frustration. But the tears didn't last long. The twin suns waited for no man's breakdown. The smaller, harsher one was already climbing, its white-hot gaze burning away the morning's chill. Self-pity was a fuel that burned too quickly here. It left only ashes. He had to think. He had to plan. Scavenging and crude snare setting were dead-end strategies. He was an urban planner, damn it. His strength wasn't brute force, it was systems thinking. He needed to stop reacting and start designing. System, he croaked, wiping his face with a less filthy part of his sleeve. I need a strategic objective. Not a tutorial task. What is the single most impactful, foundational piece of infrastructure I can build with my current? Everything? The system was silent for a moment, processing. The wireframe map of the area reappeared in his vision, the thin blue line of the water source glowing more prominently. Analysis complete. Priority recommendation, establish permanent freshwater access. Project, gravity-fed sand filter and storage. Impact, high. User survival probability increases by 45%. Enable small-scale agriculture. Prerequisite for advanced construction. Required materials, clay, sand, gravel, charcoal, large porous stones. The list scrolled on, a daunting inventory of things he didn't have and didn't know where to find. But it was a blueprint. A real project. It gave him a direction other than don't die today. His first target was clay. The system's map indicated a potential deposit near the muddy pool he'd been using. He spent the morning on a grim archaeological dig, using a sharp-edged rock to scrape at the earth, his blistered hands screaming in protest. He found it a layer of cool, grayish clay beneath the topsoil. It was a small victory, but it felt more significant than catching the rabbit. He was no longer just taking from the land, he was beginning to understand its composition. As he worked, he was acutely, painfully aware of his surroundings. Every shadow felt like it had a wolfish shape. Every rustle of the wind sounded like the soft pad of a massive foot. The memory of Kalen's gaze was a brand on his consciousness. It wasn't the overt threat he'd expected from the novel's villain-centered plot. It was subtler, more unnerving. It was the constant, silent pressure of being a specimen under a microscope. He decided to test a theory. He moved from the clay deposit to a cluster of the thorny bushes, pretending to examine them for suitability as weaving material. As he did, he cast furtive glances towards the rocky high ground where Kalen had first appeared. Nothing. He waited a few minutes, then deliberately moved again, this time heading towards a dry riverbed littered with stones, muttering to himself about aggregate for foundation work. He moved slowly, making a show of inspecting stones. And there. A flicker of movement on a different ridge, to the southwest this time. He didn't get a clear look, just the impression of a large, gray shape settling into the shadows between two boulders. His heart thumped once, hard. He was right. He was being shadowed. The realization was terrifying, but it was also data. Kalen wasn't a random encounter. He was maintaining a loose, mobile perimeter around him. He was a persistent, silent stakeholder in Luo Yan's little infrastructure project. The day wore on, a grueling cycle of labor and paranoia. He gathered clay, collected the best gravel and sand he could find, and piled up charcoal from the dead shrubs. His shelter began to look less like a nest and more like a disorganized worksite. It was progress, measured in piles of raw materials. As the larger sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular, in different shades of orange and purple, Luo Yan allowed himself a moment to sit. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache. He was filthy, exhausted, and still profoundly disoriented. But he had a plan. He had materials. And he had 45 points. It was nothing, but it was more than the 10 he'd started with this morning. He risked a glance towards the ridge where he'd last seen the movement. The shadows were long now, pooling in the crevices of the rock. He saw nothing. But the feeling of being watched had never truly left. And then, a new sound reached him. Faint at first, then growing clearer. It was a low, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate. It sounded like a drum? Or something being pounded into the earth. He stood up, his weariness forgotten, and crept to the edge of his rocky outcrop, peering into the gathering dusk. In the distance, maybe a mile or two away, where the map indicated the river curved, he saw them. Pinpricks of light. Firelight. Dozens of them, clustered together. A settlement. The wolf tribe. The sound was the beat of their life, carried on the evening air. It was the sound of a community, of people, of a world that was functioning without him. It was a siren's call and a warning bell all at once. That was where the plot was. That was where the main characters, the love interests, the political intrigue from the novel all resided. That was Kalen's home. As he stood there, caught between longing and dread, a final, chilling realization dawned on him. Kalen's silent surveillance wasn't just about curiosity. He wasn't just watching a strange creature. He was hurting him. The encounters, the appearances from different directions, they were all subtly pushing him, guiding his movements, away from the open wastes and towards the river. Towards the tribe. The Beast King wasn't just observing his project, he was curating its location. Luo Yan shivered, and it had nothing to do with the cooling air. He had thought he was building a foundation for his own survival. But he was beginning to suspect he was merely constructing a stage, and the king was waiting in the wings, ready for the play to begin. The discovery of the tribe's fires felt like a verdict. It pinned Luo Yan to the map, transforming the abstract barren wastes into a specific, precarious address, nowhere, on the precarious fringe of Beast King territory. He spent a sleepless night, the rhythmic, distant drumming a constant reminder that he was not alone in this world, and that company could be far more dangerous than solitude. Every snap of a twig in the darkness was Kalen's footfall. Every rustle was a scout creeping closer. His pathetic lean-to, which had once felt like a triumph, now felt like a target painted on his back. When dawn's first gray light finally seeped into the sky, Luo Yan felt hollowed out, scraped clean by fear and exhaustion. But the fear had crystallized into a sharp, clear purpose. He needed to accelerate his plan. He couldn't just survive day to day, he needed to build something that demonstrated value, something that might, in the twisted logic of this world, grant him a semblance of security. Or at least, make him less of a curiosity and more of an asset. The gravity-fed filter was his ticket. He threw himself into the work with a frenetic, almost desperate energy. The clay was his first major hurdle. He needed to form it into a large, watertight container for the final filtration stage. Without a wheel or proper tools, it was a brutal exercise in mud pie engineering. He kneaded the cold, slimy clay with his battered hands, squeezing out impurities, then painstakingly coiled and smoothed it into a crude, lopsided pot that was large enough to hold several gallons of water. It looked like something a child would make, but it was solid. He hoped. As he worked, smoothing the final curves, the feeling of being watched intensified. It was no longer a sporadic prickle but a constant, low-grade hum of awareness, like a spider sensing vibrations on its web. He didn't bother looking up. He knew Kalen was there, a silent spectator to his clumsy pottery lesson. Just ignore him, Luo Yan muttered to himself, focusing on the clay. He's just quality control. A very intimidating, furry quality control inspector. He placed the finished pot in a sunny spot to dry and bake, then turned to the filter's core. Using a larger, naturally bold stone, he began layering it with the materials he'd gathered, a base of the finest gravel he could sort, a thicker layer of coarse sand, and a central matrix of crushed charcoal. It was a larger, more sophisticated version of his first, life-saving filter. This one wasn't for a single drink, it was for a supply. The work was monotonous, meditative. The rhythmic sorting of stones, the sifting of sand, began to calm his frayed nerves. For a few hours, he was just a craftsman solving a problem, the looming threat of the Beast King relegated to a background nuisance. But the universe, and this world's particular narrative, seemed to delight in disrupting his fragile peace. He was hunched over, packing the charcoal layer, when a shadow fell over him. It wasn't the waning light of the orange sun. This shadow was large, solid, and blotted out the world. The air grew still. The ever-present hum of insects ceased. Luo Yan froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. Slowly, so slowly his vertebrae creaked in protest, he looked up. Kalen stood less than 10 feet away. This was not a distant observation from a ridge. This was an invasion of personal space. Luo Yan could see the individual strands of silver-gray fur on his powerful legs, the subtle scar that notched one of his eyebrows, the way his dark nostrils flared as he scented the air. He was even larger up close, a monument of muscle and primal power. He carried the scent of sun-warmed stone, dry grass, and something wild and clean, like the wind after a storm. Luo Yan's mind went blank, wiped clean by a tidal wave of pure, animalistic fear. This was it. The moment the protagonist eliminates the annoying side character. He braced for a snarl, for a flash of claws, for the end. But Kalen didn't move. His amber eyes, deep and intelligent, swept over Luo Yan's work, the half-built filter, the piles of sand and gravel, the drying clay pot. His gaze was intense, analytical. It was the look of a master builder inspecting an apprentice's work, not a predator sizing up prey. Then, those eyes shifted. They landed on Luo Yan himself, taking in his trembling hands, his dirt-streaked face, the sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. There was no malice in that look. No anger. It was assessing. Curious. Deeply, profoundly confusing. Kalen's massive chest rose and fell with a slow breath. Then, he moved. It wasn't an attack. It was a single, fluid step forward. He lifted one powerful arm, and in his hand was a hair. But not like the scrawny one Luo Yan had caught. This was a large, plump creature, its fur a rich, tawny brown. It was freshly killed, its neck broken with clean, efficient force. Kalen extended his arm and dropped the hair on the ground between them. The soft thud of the body hitting the sand was the loudest sound in the world. Luo Yan could only stare, his brain refusing to process the scene. A gift? A reward for his hard work? A taunt? A test? Kalen made a sound, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate from his chest. It wasn't a growl. It was something else, a noise so deep it was more felt than heard. Then, his eyes met Luo Yan's one last time, a long, unreadable look that seemed to convey a universe of unspoken things. And just like that, he turned. He didn't vanish into the shadows this time. He simply walked away, his stride long and ground-eating, his tail giving a single, slow sweep behind him. He didn't look back. Luo Yan remained rooted to the spot for a full minute after Kalen had disappeared from view, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He stared at the dead hare, a stark offering on the red sand. This changed everything. The simple predator-prey dynamic he'd been clinging to was shattered. This was communication. This was intentional. The Beast King wasn't just hurting him, he was providing for him. Was this some form of ownership? A way of saying, this strange, soft creature and his projects are under my protection? Or was it, as the shaman would later suggest, the first, instinctual gesture of a courtship he didn't even understand himself? Luo Yan's eyes drifted from the hare to his half-finished water filter, then to the points counter in his vision. 45. He had been building infrastructure for survival, 4 points, for a way home. But now, he realized with a sinking feeling, he was also building something for an audience of one. And that audience had just made it clear, in the most primal way possible, that he was invested in the show. He had an uninvited guest, a silent patron, and a terrifyingly persistent admirer all rolled into one 7-foot-tall, wolfish package. And Luo Yan had no idea what the next act of this play was supposed to be. The hare was a problem. It lay there on the ground, a tawny brown accusation. Luo Yan's stomach, traitorous and empty, clenched with a primal craving. But his mind, the last bastion of his civilized self, recoiled. Accepting it felt like signing a contract written in a language he couldn't read, with clauses that involved his own autonomy. In the end, hunger and pragmatism won. He butchered the animal with slightly more skill than the first, his hands still trembling but his movements less frantic. He managed to get a fire going this time, a frustrating hour of spinning a sharp stick between his palms on a piece of dry wood until a wisp of smoke, then a glorious, tiny ember, appeared. He nursed it into a small, controlled flame, feeling a surge of triumph that was entirely disproportionate to the accomplishment. Cooked meat. It was a taste of heaven, a profound comfort that almost brought tears to his eyes again. This time, they were tears of relief. Task complete, basic fire starting. Plus 15 points. Task complete, sustained nutrition. Plus 10 points. Total points, 70/10,000. 70 points. He was rich. And yet, so poor. The feast of cooked hare and the warmth of the fire had lulled him into a false sense of security. It was a bubble, and the system was the needle poised to pop it. As he sat by the dying embers, the familiar, sterile chime echoed in his skull. New primary task available, hydration infrastructure I. A new screen, more complex than the others, materialized. It wasn't just text. It was a schematic, a beautifully rendered, cross-sectional diagram of a deep-bore well, complete with a reinforced stone lip, a pulley system, and an underground channel leading to a storage cistern. It was a piece of proper engineering. Objective: construct a sustainable freshwater well for the Western Wolf tribe. Luo Yan's blood ran cold. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Absolutely not. Location: designated site within Western Wolf tribe settlement. Reward: 500 points. Failure penalty: point deduction of 500. The air left his lungs in a whoosh. 500 points. It was a mountain of progress, a leap that would catapult him a 20th of the way home. But the failure penalty, it was a cliff. It would put him in a point deficit, a concept that felt terrifyingly like debt slavery to this cosmic bureaucracy. He couldn't fail. And the location? Within the settlement. The very heart of the plot. The place where, according to the novel, the original Luo Yan would have been scheming, poisoning, and making a spectacular nuisance of himself. It was the one place he had sworn to avoid. This is a trap, he said aloud, his voice tight. You're herding me right into the lion's den. Or the wolf's den, in this case. Analysis: the Western Wolf tribe possesses the necessary labor force, raw materials, and forging capabilities required for this project. Users' current location and resource access are insufficient. Collaboration is logistically imperative for mission success. The system's logic was irrefutable, cold, and utterly maddening. It wasn't a narrative trap, it was a logistical one. He was an architect with a brilliant blueprint but no construction crew. The tribe was the crew. The system was simply connecting the dots, and the line went straight through Kalen's territory. He spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated paralysis. He tried to work on his smaller, personal water filter, but his heart wasn't in it. What was the point of a single-person filter when his ticket home depended on building municipal-grade infrastructure? He watched the distant smoke from the tribe's cook fires. He listened to the faint, carried sounds of life, the occasional shout, the barking of what he assumed were their wolf companions. It was no longer an abstract concept. It was a community of individuals. Warriors, mothers, elders, children. And he, a stranger with a strange mission, had to walk in and tell them how to build what was probably the most critical resource in their world. The next morning, the decision was made for him. As the twin suns rose, he saw a party of 5 orcs leave the settlement and move with purposeful speed in his general direction. They weren't meandering. They were hunting, or scouting. And his worksite was directly in their path. Panic seized him. He could run, but to where? Deeper into the barren wastes where he would surely die? Or he could stand his ground. He made his choice. It was time to stop being the scared rabbit and start being the project manager. He spent the next hour in a frenzy of preparation. He smoothed out a patch of sand next his shelter. Using a sharp stone, he began to draw. It wasn't art, it was a presentation. He sketched the diagram the system had shown him, the cross-section of the well, the pulley, the cistern. His lines were shaky, his proportions probably off, but the idea was there. It was a blueprint. He heard them before he saw them. The low rumble of guttural voices, the soft thud of heavy footfalls. He straightened up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wiped his sweaty palms on his ruined slacks and tried to project a confidence he did not feel. The 5 orcs crested a small rise and stopped. They were all massive, clad in practical leathers and furs, armed with stone-tipped spears. Their eyes, in shades of gold, amber, and green, fixed on him with a mixture of suspicion, curiosity, and open hostility. They were everything he had feared, the brutal, warrior race from the novel. And then, a 6th figure emerged from behind them. Kalen. He moved to the front of the group, his presence instantly commanding silence and deference from the other warriors. His silver fur seemed to almost glow in the morning light. His gaze swept over Luo Yan's camp, taking in the improved lean-to, the fire pit, the drying clay pot, and the piles of sorted materials. There was a flicker of what might have been approval in his eyes. Then, they fell to the drawing in the sand. He took a step closer, then another, his movements silent and deliberate. The other orcs watched, tense and ready. Luo Yan's mouth was dry as dust. This was it. He pointed a trembling finger at his crude blueprint, then at the distant settlement, then back at the drawing. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again, forcing the words out. I can bring you water. Not from a muddy pool. Clean water. From deep in the earth. A well that will never run dry. He pointed to the deep circle representing the well shaft, then mimed drinking. He pointed to the pulley system, mimed lifting a heavy bucket. He pointed to the cistern, then made a wide, encompassing gesture to indicate the whole tribe. The warriors muttered among themselves, their expressions skeptical. One of them, a scarred male with a missing tusk, snorted and said something short and dismissive in their rough language. But Kalen wasn't listening to them. His entire focus was on the drawing. He crouched down, his immense frame folding with fluid grace, bringing his eyes level with the sketch in the sand. He reached out one large, claw-tipped hand and traced the line Luo Yan had drawn for the underground water channel. He understood. He saw the logic, the architecture of it. He looked from the blueprint up to Luo Yan's face. The intensity in his amber eyes was staggering. It wasn't the curiosity of watching a strange animal. It was the focus of a strategist evaluating a new weapon, a king assessing a potentially invaluable resource. Luo Yan held his breath. This was the moment. Would he see a madman scratching in the dirt? Or a solution? Kalen rose to his full height, towering over Luo Yan. He looked at his warriors and gave a single, sharp, guttural word. It was not a question. It was a command. The warriors fell silent immediately, their skepticism replaced by disciplined obedience. Then, Kalen turned his gaze back to Luo Yan. He gave a single, slow, definitive nod. The deal was struck. Not with words, but with a shared understanding of a blueprint drawn in sand. Luo Yan had his construction crew. But he had also just walked directly into the story he was trying to avoid, and the most dangerous character in it was now his primary stakeholder. The equation was simple and terrifying: 500 points equals the tribe's cooperation equals Kalen's direct involvement. There was no turning back now. The walk to the Wolf tribe settlement was the longest of Luo Yan's life. He was flanked by the 5 warriors, their sheer size and the casual way they carried their weapons making him feel like a prisoner being escorted to an execution. Kalen led the way, his broad back a silent, impenetrable wall. He never looked back, radiating a confidence that suggested he never doubted Luo Yan would follow. As they drew closer, the scale of the settlement became clear. It wasn't a primitive camp of scattered tents, but a structured, if rugged, village built into the side of a rocky mesa. Homes were carved directly into the cliff face or constructed from sun-baked clay bricks and massive, weathered bones of creatures Luo Yan didn't want to imagine. The air was thick with the smells of smoke, curing leather, roasting meat, and the musky scent of orc and wolf. As they entered the main thoroughfare, every activity ground to a halt. Orcs of all sizes stopped to stare. Females with intricate braids in their fur clutched their young closer. Elders squinted from their doorways, their expressions unreadable. Warriors standing guard by a large, hide-covered entrance straightened, their hands tightening on their spears. The hostility from the scouting party had been a gentle breeze. This was a gale force wind of pure, undiluted suspicion. He was an outsider, soft, strange, and walking in the shadow of their king. Kalen ignored it all. He led them to a central, open area near the base of the cliff, a place that seemed to function as a communal meeting ground. He stopped and pointed a single, clawed finger at the hard-packed earth. Here, his gesture said. Luo Yan's mind, which had been frozen in a haze of fear, snapped back into professional mode. This was the site. He looked around, assessing. The ground was level, there was good access, and the cliff face could provide shade and potentially structural support. It was a good choice. He nodded, then turned his attention back to his blueprint, which was now etched into his mind. He needed to mark the location. He picked up a sharp piece of stone and began to scratch a large circle into the earth, defining the well's circumference. The watching orcs murmured. A circle in the dirt was something they understood. It was a beginning. Then, the real work started. Kalen barked a series of short, guttural commands. The warriors who had escorted him immediately dispersed, returning with tools, heavy stone picks, shovels with blades made of the shoulder bones of large animals, and thick, woven baskets for moving earth. Luo Yan took a deep breath. This was it. Theory meeting practice. He pointed to the center of the circle and mimed digging. The warriors looked at Kalen, who gave a sharp nod. The largest of them, the one with the missing tusk, stepped forward, hefted a stone pick, and brought it down with a grunt. The sound of stone hitting hard-packed earth was a solid, definitive thud. The project had officially begun. The first hour was a lesson in brute force and frustration. The orcs were immensely strong, but they had no concept of technique. They hacked at the ground, widening the hole chaotically instead of digging straight down. The sides began to crumble. Luo Yan's planner instinct screamed in protest. He waved his arms, rushing forward. No. Stop. It needs to be straight. Vertical. They ignored him, their focus on their task complete. Frustrated, Luo Yan looked desperately at Kalen, who was observing from the sidelines, his arms crossed. He wasn't interfering. Fine, Luo Yan thought, a spark of defiance igniting. If you won't manage them, I will. He jumped into the shallow, uneven hole, much to the surprise of the orcs digging. He grabbed one of the bone shovels. It was shockingly heavy and painstakingly began to scrape at one side of the hole, trying to carve a clean, vertical wall. He was pathetically slow and weak compared to them, but his movements were precise, intentional. He pointed at his clean wall, then at their crumbled side, shaking his head. Then he pointed at the clean wall again and nodded. The orcs just stared, confused. Then, Kalen moved. He stepped to the edge of the pit, crouched down, and reached in. He didn't take a tool. Instead, he used his own bare hands, his powerful fingers and claws digging into the earth. With a few precise, controlled movements, he sculpted the crumbling side into a perfect, vertical face, mirroring Luo Yan's pathetic attempt but with the efficiency of a master craftsman. He looked at his warriors and gave a single, low grunt, pointing at the clean wall. Understanding dawned on their faces. The missing tusked orc grunted in acknowledgement and immediately began to imitate his king's technique, using the blade of his bone shovel to carefully shear the earth. A wave of relief, mixed with a strange sense of vindication, washed over Luo Yan. Kalen wasn't just a silent partner, he was a translator. He was the bridge between Luo Yan's abstract knowledge and his people's physical prowess. From that moment on, a fragile, unspoken workflow was established. Luo Yan would point, sketch in the dirt, or demonstrate a technique on a small scale. The warriors would watch, often baffled. Kalen would then step in, interpret Luo Yan's intent with his own actions, and the warriors would instantly comply. He was the project foreman, and a terrifyingly effective one. As the day wore on, the suns beat down mercilessly. Luo Yan was drenched in sweat, his muscles screaming. He was handed a water skin by a young orc female who refused to meet his eyes. The water inside was warm and had a faint, earthy taste, but it was clean. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. During a break, as Luo Yan sat exhausted on a rock, massaging his aching shoulders, Kalen approached. He held out a strip of dried, smoked meat. It was the same kind the warriors were eating. Luo Yan took it with a silent nod of thanks. The meat was tough and gamey, but it was fuel. He was no longer just being given food, he was being given rations, like any other worker on the site. The well shaft grew deeper, the sides clean and strong. The pile of excavated earth beside it grew into a small hill. The initial suspicion of the tribe didn't vanish, but it had been tempered by a dawning curiosity. They saw their king working alongside this strange creature, not as a subordinate, but as a partner. They saw the logic in the digging, the purpose in the precision. At the end of the day, as the larger sun dipped below the horizon, Luo Yan was filthy, exhausted, and his body felt like one giant bruise. But as he looked at the perfectly cylindrical, man-deep hole in the ground, a profound sense of accomplishment settled over him. It was more than a hole. It was the first chapter of a collaboration he had never thought possible. Kalen came to stand beside him, looking down into the excavation. His silence was no longer intimidating, it was contemplative. He looked from the well to Luo Yan, his amber eyes reflecting the torchlight beginning to flicker around the settlement. There was no smile, no words of praise. But there was a deep, solid respect in that gaze. He had seen Luo Yan's mind at work. He had seen his determination, his willingness to get his hands dirty, and the value of his strange, blueprint knowledge. Luo Yan had set out to build a well. But he was also, brick by brick, dismantling the Beast King's preconceptions. The road home was still impossibly long, but for the first time, the path under his feet felt solid. The rhythm of the well became the rhythm of Luo Yan's life. His solitary, paranoid existence in the wastes was a fading nightmare, replaced by the grueling, communal reality of the worksite. He no longer slept in his pathetic lean-to. At Kalen's unspoken but unmistakable insistence conveyed by the simple act of a warrior carrying his few possessions to an empty, small cave dwelling at the edge of the settlement, he had a proper roof over his head. It was sparse, cool, and smelled of old stone, but it was safe. The work was brutally physical. His body, though still complaining, was slowly adapting. The softness of his office life was being carved away, replaced by lean muscle and calluses that were becoming as tough as leather. But the real transformation was happening in the dynamic between him and the Beast King. Kalen was always there. Not as a distant overseer, but as his primary, hands-on partner. The other orcs would come and go, assigned to tasks like quarrying the specific flat stones Luo Yan needed for the lining, or braiding the incredibly tough sinew ropes for the pulley system. But Kalen remained, a constant, silent pillar of strength and surprising intuition. They developed a language of their own, a dialect composed of gestures, pointed looks, and the occasional sketch in the dirt. Luo Yan would trace the pattern for the herringbone brickwork needed to support the well's curved interior. Kalen would study it for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with an economy of motion that was breathtaking, he would begin setting the stones, his massive, clawed hands placing each one with the delicate precision of a watchmaker. He didn't just copy the pattern, he understood the physics of it, the way the interlocking shapes created strength. One afternoon, they hit a snag. A stubborn layer of bedrock refused to yield to the orc stone picks. The warriors gathered, discussing in grunts and gestures, suggesting they shift the well a few feet. Luo Yan felt a spike of panic. Moving it could mean missing the aquifer the system had mapped. It could mean failure. He shook his head vehemently, pointing down. We have to go through it. The water is right there, I know it. The orcs looked skeptical. It was Kalen who solved it. He left the worksite and returned a short while later carrying a massive, heavy stone maul, its head blackened and polished by use. He gestured for everyone to clear the area. Then, with a focused intensity, he began to swing. It wasn't a wild, furious beating. It was a measured, rhythmic, powerful thud, thud, thud. Each impact sent shivers through the ground, a percussive beat that spoke of immense, controlled power. He was a force of nature, patiently, deliberately breaking a mountain. Luo Yan watched, mesmerized. This wasn't the savage beast from the novel. This was a leader, a problem solver, a being of profound dedication. Sweat gleamed on Kalen's silver fur, tracing the powerful lines of his back and shoulders. The raw, physical presence of him was no longer just terrifying, it was impressive. Awe-inspiring, even. When a final, decisive crack echoed through the pit, revealing the darker, damp earth beneath the bedrock, a collective grunt of approval came from the watching orcs. Kalen leaned on the maul, his chest heaving, and looked up at Luo Yan. There was no boast in his eyes, only a quiet question. Is this right? Luo Yan gave him a thumbs up, a human gesture that had become their sign for correct or good job. A gesture that, to his astonishment, Kalen now returned with a slow, deliberate curl of his own thumb against his massive fist. The sight of it sent an unexpected, warm flush through Luo Yan's chest. The proximity was the most disarming thing. In the confined space of the deepening well, they worked shoulder to shoulder, or rather, shoulder to hip. Luo Yan would be directing the placement of a stone, and he could feel the heat radiating from Kalen's body, smell the clean scent of his fur mixed with dust and sweat. He became hyper-aware of the small things, the way Kalen's ears would twitch, tracking sounds Luo Yan couldn't hear, the low, thoughtful rumble he made when considering a problem, the way he would, without a word, take a tool that was too heavy for Luo Yan and complete the task himself. One evening, after a particularly long day, Luo Yan was struggling to tie off a complex knot in the sinew rope for the pulley. His fingers, numb with fatigue, were all thumbs. He sighed in frustration, ready to give up. A shadow fell over him. Kalen knelt beside him, so close Luo Yan could feel the air move. He didn't take the rope away. Instead, he placed his own large, claw-tipped hands over Luo Yan's, his touch surprisingly gentle. He guided Luo Yan's fingers through the motions, his own moving with an innate, practiced dexterity. His hands were warm, the fur on the back soft. Luo Yan's breath hitched. The world seemed to shrink to the space between their hands, to the shared focus on a simple knot. It was over in seconds. The knot was perfect. Kalen didn't immediately pull away. He stayed for a moment, a solid, warm presence at Luo Yan's side, before rising silently and returning to his own tasks. Luo Yan stared at his hands, the ghost of that touch lingering. His heart was doing a strange, fluttering rhythm in his chest. This wasn't fear. This was something else entirely, something he had no blueprint for. The well was nearly complete. They had reached the damp, cool layer where water was already beginning to seep through the stonework, pooling in the bottom. The project was a success. The tribe watched with a new, respectful silence, understanding that this strange, soft-skinned male had not been a waste of their king's time. That night, as Luo Yan sat outside his cave, looking up at the unfamiliar, brilliant stars, he didn't just think about the 500 points that would soon be his. He thought about the solid, silent figure who had broken rock for him. He thought about the guided knot. He thought about the way Kalen's amber eyes sought his for approval after a difficult task. He was building a path home. But with every stone laid, every silent moment shared, another path was being built right here, one that felt dangerously like a foundation for something he couldn't name. The system's goal was 10,000 points. But for the first time, Luo Yan wondered if the real cost of going home would be leaving something or someone behind that he had never expected to find. The well was a triumph. The morning after they broke through the bedrock, clear, cold water had seeped up to fill the bottom third of the stone-lined shaft. By the next day, it was chest-deep on an orc, and crystal clear. The entire tribe had gathered, their earlier suspicion replaced by a reverent, buzzing awe. Children darted to the edge, only to be pulled back by their mothers, who looked at the overflowing bucket with something like tears in their eyes. An elder, her fur grizzled white, dipped a gnarled hand into the water, brought it to her lips, and then let out a shuddering sob of pure joy. Luo Yan stood back, watching the celebration. The system's chime was a symphony in his mind. Primary task complete, hydration infrastructure I. Reward, 500 points. Total points, 570/10,000. 570 points. It was a staggering number. A tangible, massive leap towards home. He should have been elated, dancing on the spot. Instead, he felt a profound, quiet exhaustion, and a strange, hollow ache beneath his ribs. His eyes found Kaelin, who was standing by the well, accepting the gratitude of his people with silent, dignified nods. As if sensing his gaze, Kaelin looked up. Their eyes met across the crowd. There was no thumbs up this time. Just a long, deep look that seemed to hold the weight of every stone they had lifted together, every silent moment of understanding. It was a look that made the hollow ache in Luo Yan's chest sharpen. He quickly looked away, a flush warming his neck. The celebration felt overwhelming. Needing space, he retreated to the relative quiet of his cave dwelling. He sat on the pile of furs that served as his bed, listening to the distant sounds of revelry. He focused on the points counter. 570. He was over 5% of the way home. He should be planning his next project. A bridge? Irrigation? His mind, usually so sharp and eager for the next problem, was sluggish, resistant. The hide flap over his doorway shifted. Luo Yan's head snapped up. Kaelin stood there, silhouetted against the firelight of the settlement. He didn't enter, simply stood, waiting. An invitation. Hesitantly, Luo Yan stood and followed him. Kaelin didn't lead him back to the celebration, but away from it, towards the outskirts of the settlement where the mesa met the open wastes. They walked in silence, the sounds of the tribe fading behind them, replaced by the vast, whispering emptiness of the desert night. They stopped at a flat, rocky overlook. Below, the barren waste stretched out under the twin moons, one a pale, pockmarked pearl, the other a sliver of sharp, green cheese. It was a view of terrible, desolate beauty. This was the world he was supposed to save. Kaelin stood beside him, his presence a solid anchor in the immense space. He wasn't looking at the view, he was looking at Luo Yan. And then, he did something he had never done before. He spoke. His voice was nothing like Luo Yan had imagined. It wasn't a beastly growl. It was a low, resonant baritone, rough with disuse, the sound of stones grinding deep underground. The words were in the Orcish tongue, guttural and complex, but the meaning was projected with such raw, simple intent that Luo Yan understood it perfectly. You are not from here. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Luo Yan's breath caught. He could deny it, but what was the point? The evidence was all around them. His softness, his knowledge, his very cells were alien here. He simply nodded, his throat too tight for words. Kaelin's amber eyes glinted in the moonlight. He took a slow step closer. Your scent, it is like lightning on dry air. Like a place I have never been, but know I must find. He gestured back towards the settlement, towards the well. You build not for glory, or for a place in the tribe. You build like you are keeping a promise to the sky itself. Why? Luo Yan stared, stunned. This was the heart of it. The Beast King wasn't a brute, he was a philosopher king, a reader of souls. How could he explain the system? The points? The desperate, clawing need for home? I have to, Luo Yan whispered, the words feeling inadequate. It's a task. A bargain. If I build, if I help, I can go back. He didn't know if Kaelin understood the words, but he understood the meaning, the yearning, the deep-seated drive for a different horizon. A low rumble started in Kaelin's chest, not of anger, but of profound contemplation. He closed the final distance between them. He was so close Luo Yan could feel the warmth of his body, could see the intricate patterns in the silver of his fur. My soul has been silent for a long time, Kaelin's voice resonated in Luo Yan's mind. It only learned its shape the day you fell from the sky. When I saw you make water from sand, I did not see a trick. I saw a missing piece of the world clicking into place. My place. He lifted his hand, but didn't touch Luo Yan. He simply held it between them, a gesture of offering and question. You speak of a bargain to go back. I cannot make such a bargain. I can only tell you what is true. Your scent is my North Star. Your blueprints are the songs my soul has been trying to sing. You can leave. I will not stop you. But I cannot unknow you. I cannot unscent you. Where you go, a part of me will always be reaching. The truth of it, the sheer, terrifying fatedness of it, crashed over Luo Yan. This wasn't a choice Kalen was making. It was a biological, spiritual certainty. He wasn't being persistent, he was being constant, like gravity. The gifts, the protection, the silent partnership, it was all the instinctual behavior of a creature that had found its one, true mate. He thought of the original novel's plot, of the petty, vicious Luo Yan who had tried to earn this creature's attention with poison and schemes. The irony was so bitter it made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. He had done nothing but be himself, and in doing so, he had stumbled into the one role the story never intended for him. He looked at Kalen's hand, suspended between them. He looked into his eyes, which held no demand, only a patient, devastating truth. Luo Yan's carefully constructed walls, his plans for escape, his entire identity as an unwilling visitor, crumbled to dust. He wasn't just building infrastructure for a world. He was building a life. And the foreman for that project was a 7-foot-tall wolfman whose soul apparently recognized his own. Slowly, hesitantly, Luo Yan lifted his own hand and placed it against Kalen's. The touch was electric. It wasn't just skin and fur. It was a connection, a circuit completing. Kalen's fingers closed around his, warm and strong and impossibly gentle. He didn't pull Luo Yan closer. He just held his hand, there under the alien moons, as the truth settled between them. The well was finished. The road home was still there. But Luo Yan now understood the real, unspoken cost. He had been trying to build a way out. But Kalen, with his silent strength and unwavering gaze, had been building a reason to stay. And for the first time, staring into those amber eyes, Luo Yan wasn't sure which blueprint he wanted to follow. The walk back to his cave was a blur. The touch of Kalen's hand was a brand on his skin, a phantom warmth that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The words "your scent is my North Star" echoed in his mind, reshaping every memory, every glance, every silent moment they had shared. Kalen did not follow him inside. He stopped at the entrance, a respectful silhouette against the night, his gaze holding Luo Yan for a long, silent moment that felt like a vow. Then, he turned and melted back into the shadows of the sleeping settlement, leaving Luo Yan alone with the roaring tumult in his head. He collapsed onto his furs, his body thrumming with a strange, restless energy. He felt raw, flayed open. The carefully constructed narrative of his existence here, the unwilling visitor, the point-driven contractor, had been demolished. He was no longer just Luo Yan, the displaced urban planner. He was Luo Yan, the fated one of the Beast King. The object of a devotion so absolute, so instinctual, it felt less like an emotion and more like a law of nature. Sleep was impossible. He replayed every interaction. The first sighting on the ridge, not a predator assessing prey, but a soul recognizing its counterpart. The gift of the hair, not a test, but the first, clumsy offering of a provider. The shared labor in the well, not a king overseeing a servant, but a partner building a foundation for a shared future. He had been reading the situation all wrong. He'd been using the lens of a bad novel, expecting villainy and violence, when all along, Kalen had been operating on a frequency of pure, unwavering certainty. When the first hints of gray light filtered into the cave, Luo Yan was still awake, his mind and heart tangled in a knot he couldn't unravel. The hollow ache from the well's completion was still there, but it had a name now. It was the terrifying, exhilarating fear of being so profoundly seen. He heard the familiar, soft footfalls outside. His breath hitched. It was time. The moment of reckoning. He stood, his legs unsteady, and walked to the hide flap. He took a deep, bracing breath, preparing himself for, what? A declaration? A demand? The cold, practical part of his brain screamed that this changed nothing. The points were still there. 570. Home was still the goal. He pulled the flap aside. Kalen stood there, just as he had the day he'd brought the hair. The early morning light cast his silver fur in shades of steel and pearl. In his hands, he did not hold a tool or a weapon or a gift of food. He held a woven cup, intricately made from desert grasses, from which steam gently curled. The rich, earthy scent of a roasted root beverage the tribe drank filled the air. His amber eyes were clear, calm, and utterly focused. There was no hesitation in them, no question. The confession of the night before had settled into a bedrock of fact. He was not here to ask. He was here to continue. He offered the cup. Luo Yan stared at it, then at him. This was it. The despair he had feared, the utter, inescapable reality of this creature's presence in his life. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple, devastating act of care. He wasn't being chased, he was being claimed, with a patience that felt as immense and timeless as the desert itself. He could refuse. He could slam the door, metaphorically and literally. He could shout, "I'm not from here. I have to go home." But as he looked into Kalen's eyes, he knew it would be like shouting at the tide. It wouldn't change a thing. Kalen would simply wait, the cup would grow cold, and he would return with another one tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until the end of time. A strange calm descended upon Luo Yan. The internal struggle didn't vanish, but it quieted. The fight-or-flight reflex, which had been his constant companion since arrival, finally, truly, shut off. He reached out and took the cup. His fingers brushed against Kalen's. The contact was no longer a shock, but a confirmation. The warmth of the earthenware seeped into his hands. Kalen's gaze softened, a subtle relaxation around the eyes that was more powerful than any human smile. He gave a slow, single nod. Then, he did something that stole the air from Luo Yan's lungs. He didn't leave. He simply took a step forward, over the threshold, and into the cave. He walked to the cold fire pit in the center of the small space and knelt. With practiced ease, he began to rebuild the fire, arranging the tinder and wood from the stack Luo Yan had gathered. He was making himself at home. Luo Yan stood by the entrance, holding the warm cup, watching the beast king of the wolf tribe perform the most domestic of tasks in his dwelling. The surrealism of it was absolute. This was no longer a visit. This was an arrival. Kalen got the fire going, the flames casting a warm, dancing light that pushed back the cave's shadows. He then rose and sat cross-legged beside the pit, looking at Luo Yan expectantly. Not with demand, but with a quiet, profound invitation. "Sit with me." The last of Luo Yan's resistance crumbled. What was the point? He walked over and sat down on the packed earth floor across from him, the fire between them. He took a sip of the bitter, warming brew. It was perfect. They sat in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire. It wasn't the tense, watchful silence of before. It was a comfortable, shared silence. The silence of two people who had said the most important things and now had only to exist in the same space. Kalen's presence filled the cave, not as an intrusion, but as a completion. It felt right. The hollow ache in Luo Yan's chest began to ease, soothed by the simple, undeniable reality of the wolfman sitting across from him. He looked at the points in his vision. 570. The number was still there, the goal unchanged. But it no longer felt like the only thing that mattered. It was a coordinate on a map, but he was no longer sure which map he was reading. The system chimed, its voice a familiar intrusion into the newfound peace. New foundational task available: build a home. Parameters: expand and reinforce current dwelling. Establish permanent hearth, food storage, and sleeping quarters. Reward: 200 points. Luo Yan's eyes flickered from the transparent screen to the face of the orc sitting across the fire, who was watching the flames with a contented focus. A home. Not a shelter. A home. He hadn't chosen this. He had been selected, thrown, and then relentlessly, patiently pursued. But as he sat there in the warming cave, the scent of roasted root and wood smoke and warm fur in the air, he realized a choice was still before him. He could keep fighting against the current, clinging to the memory of a world that felt a lifetime away. Or he could do what he had always done best. He could assess the site, understand the parameters, and begin to build. He looked at Kalen, who met his gaze, the firelight dancing in his amber eyes. For the first time, Luo Yan didn't look away. The road home was still there, a distant, gleaming thread. But here, now, in the warmth of this fire, was a foundation he had never planned on, but one that felt more solid than anything he had ever built. The fire died down to embers, and still, they sat. The silence between them was no longer a void to be filled, but a tapestry woven with understanding. When Kalen finally rose, it was with a quiet grace that spoke of respect for the peace they had forged. He paused at the entrance, his frame outlined by the brightening day, and gave Luo Yan one last, long look, a look that held the night's confession and the morning's promise before slipping out. Luo Yan sat for a long time after he left, the empty cup cool in his hands. The cave felt different. The air itself had changed. It was no longer just a shelter, It was a space that had been shared, sanctified by a silent pact. The system's task, build a home, glowed persistently in his vision. For the first time, he didn't see it as a chore or a means to an end. He saw it as a blueprint for a future he was suddenly, terrifyingly, eager to read. He stood, a new energy coursing through him. It wasn't the desperate drive for points, nor the frantic energy of fear. It was the clear, focused purpose of a man with a foundation to build upon. He walked out of his cave and into the heart of the settlement. The tribe was already awake and moving. The sight of the well, with a steady line of orcs collecting water, still brought a sense of awe. And now, when they looked at him, their gazes were different. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a deep, acknowledging respect. They had seen their king choose his place at this stranger's side. They understood what that meant. He went straight to the communal storage area, where tools and materials were kept. He selected a stone adze, a bundle of sinew, and several long, straight saplings that had been harvested from a hardy, riverside tree. He was no longer a supplicant or a strange curiosity. He was Luo Yan, the well builder, and his movements were met with nods of approval, even the occasional grunt that he now understood was the orc equivalent of good morning. He carried his materials back to the cave and began to work. The task was no longer about mere survival. He wasn't building a lean-to. He was framing a doorway. He wasn't piling grass for insulation, he was weaving a wall that would hold in warmth and keep out the dust-laden wind. He worked with a planner's mind, envisioning the flow of the space: a sleeping area here, a workspace for his blueprints there, a proper hearth as the centerpiece. He was so engrossed in lashing the saplings together for a proper bed frame that he didn't hear Kalen approach until his shadow fell over the work. Luo Yan looked up, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Kalen's eyes swept over the organized chaos of the expanding dwelling, taking in the clear intention behind every piece. He didn't need a translated blueprint to understand. He saw the home Luo Yan was building, and he saw that it was being built here. Without a word, Kalen set down the armful of thick, soft furs he was carrying and picked up a second adze. He didn't take over. He found the next logical task: carving notches into the support beams for the wall Luo Yan was planning, and set to work. His strength made the work swift, his precision making it perfect. This was their new dynamic. Not just foreman and translator, but partners. Co-builders. As the days turned into weeks, the cave transformed. A sturdy, hide-covered door framed the entrance. A vent in the ceiling allowed smoke to escape. Shelves were carved into the stone walls, holding Luo Yan's growing collection of tools and his precious, ongoing project lists. The bed frame was strung with woven sinew and piled high with the furs Kalen provided. The system chimed regularly. Subtask complete, reinforced dwelling structure. Plus 50 points. Subtask complete, establish permanent hearth. Plus 50 points. Subtask complete, create designated sleeping quarters. Plus 50 points. The points ticked up. 720/10,000. But the number had lost its tyrannical power over him. It was a measure of progress, yes, but no longer the sole measure of his worth. His worth was measured in the respect of the tribe, in the solidity of the walls around him, and in the silent, steadfast presence of the Beast King who worked by his side every day. One evening, the project was complete. The home was built. It was warm, secure, and functional. It was his. As they stood together at the entrance, looking in at their shared handiwork, the final chime came. Primary task complete, build a home. Reward, 200 points. Total points, 770/10,000. Kalen turned to him. The question was in his eyes, as it had been every day since the night on the ridge. Is this enough? Is this place, this life, enough to make you stay? Luo Yan looked from the finished home to the man who had helped him build it. He thought of the desperate, lonely creature he had been, scratching in the dirt for a handful of points. He thought of the long, impossible road back to a world that already felt like a fading dream. Then he looked at the reality before him. A community that had become his own. A purpose that was his to define. A bond that was as solid and real as the stone beneath his feet. He reached out and placed his hand on Kalen's arm, feeling the warm, living strength beneath the silver fur. It was an answer. It was a choice. A new screen, soft and golden, materialized in his vision, unlike any he had seen before. New foundational quest, build a life. Parameters, open-ended. Integrate fully with the wolf tribe. Pursue infrastructure projects that ensure long-term prosperity and stability. Deepen the bond with your fated one. Reward, the life you build. Luo Yan smiled, a true, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. He looked at Kalen and gave a slow, definitive nod. The road home was still there, a distant, theoretical line. But he was no longer walking it. He had reached his destination. He had built a well, he had built a home, and now, with the silent, magnificent partner at his side, he would begin the greatest project of them all. He was going to build a life. And for the first time since he'd fallen from the sky, the future didn't feel like a sentence, it felt like a blueprint, full of infinite, beautiful possibility. The points could wait. He was home.